Wonderful. And it's a great organization too. I love going on your website. You always have useful tips and strategies, and just like it almost explains the carbon tax so well. We had Yana on a number of months ago. We talked about the carbon tax. We talked about heat exchanger programs in Canada. But we're going to talk more today about an article that was put out by the Fraser Institute. Can you just tell us a little bit about that article?
Yeah, there's been a number of commentators recently that have basically put out three kind of different arguments around renewable energy and focusing a little bit on British Columbia, but really they're relevant Canada-wide and globally. The first one is that renewable energy costs too much and it's
Hmm.
intermittent, so therefore it makes grids less reliable and it drives up costs for the consumer at the end of the day, what you pay on your electricity rate. So that's kind of the first argument.
Yeah.
The second one is that climate policies will break the grid. So this
Hmm.
is things like EV sales mandates, it's things like heat pump mandates, it's banning natural gas and new developments, that all of this adds more stress to the electricity grid and will eventually overwhelm it or again drive up costs.
Right.
And I think the third argument you're seeing from a lot of groups across Canada is that Canadian utilities do import a lot of power in
Right.
certain situations. And so the suggestion is that by importing power, this means that you have some type of structural electricity deficit. And again, we wanted to kind of respond to all of these because there's nuggets of truth around all of these, and there's different examples worldwide where these things have happened. But right now in this day and time around the globe, most of these are incorrect.
Right. And I think one of the things that really bothers me about this type of information, especially around renewable energy, fossil fuels, it seems like the messages are corrupted on purpose. It seems like we've known from the past, like in from climate change and the climate change messaging coming from the decades past, that we know even oil companies have come out and said, yes, we actually perpetuated those climate denial types of information, and that climate change didn't exist and it was all a scheme done by environmentalists and so forth. And even now with renewable energy, I hear a lot of friends and family talk about renewable energy and you hear those myths that just continue to come up, and that misinformation that continues to come up and up and up. So, like the information that you talked about, that some of the stuff is true, but also it's blown out of proportion or it's not using updated data. Where's that information coming? Like, where's it deriving from?
There's a couple of points to make, and I think you've had a very good kind of setup for this conversation. That a lot of the information that people have in their heads that they've heard are things that were again relevant 10 or 15 years
Yeah.
ago. People constantly refer back to Kathleen Wynne and the Ontario government around renewable deployment, which was almost
Right.
10 years ago. And again, that was done in a way where technology was not cost effective, and the
Hmm.
rate design program actually drove up costs for consumers. So people remember that, and they keep coming back
Yeah.
to kind of what's transpired. The other part that we notice a lot, and more recently, is that renewable energy, EVs, heat pumps, they've all become part of the culture wars. And you're
Hmm.
either on Team EV or Team Renewable Energy, and or
Yeah.
you're not. And the
Yeah.
reality is that if you look at the U.S., for example, the states that have the five highest renewable and solar shares in their electricity system, they've got Republican governors. They've been Republican held. So, what you're seeing on the ground is very different than the stories that are being told in the media and on podcasts and other types of things. So it's really interesting.